Welcome to another episode of In the Lab with Hoopsology. I am your host, Matt Thomas, joined by my best friend and co-host, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Doing well. It seems like we've struck a nerve with our audience. How about yourself, man?
Yes, YouTube has been on fire lately. Let's go ahead and get the thank yous out of the way. Thank you again for all the additional subs and comments and likes and joining in on the discourse on our YouTube and for subscribing to our podcast content as well. You can, of course, subscribe anywhere you're doing podcasts, anywhere you're doing social media, and of course on YouTube as well. Really appreciate you guys. But yeah, we had a very successful video with our Caitlin Clark comments last week as that women's basketball portion of In the Lab with Hoopsology and breaking down kind of how the Indiana Fever have been treated by the WNBA as well as the Kennedy Carter versus Caitlin Clark discourse. We have more on Caitlin Clark today. This continues to dominate basketball topics impressively, given that we are also 2 games into the NBA Finals. So let's start with the hot topic of the past 2 weeks, and that is Caitlin Clark as well as the WNBA. We've got some new news on that, but Justin, I think the way I want to open this is to talk about some recent news with ratings, just to kind of give a full picture of what we're seeing so far in the WNBA. And this is the WNBA's report that I'm quoting these statistics from. And I'm reading this. I'll give him a shout out since I bookmarked his tweet or his X or whatever we're saying, at Joe Pompliano, who's a sports business insider. So shout out to him. The WNBA has released a report saying attendance is up 156% from last year, and more than half of all WNBA games this year have been sellouts. About 400,000 fans have attended WNBA games this season, filling WNBA arenas to 94% capacity. This year's televised games, so your ABC, ESPN, etc., are averaging 1.32 million viewers, nearly triple last season's average of 462,000 viewers. WNBA Countdown is averaging 741,000 viewers, a 211% increase from last year's full season average. Couple more here. The WNBA's online merchandise store has already set a single season sales record with 4+ months left in the season, and sales are up 756% compared to last year. 2 more here. The WNBA's social channels garnered 157 million video views through the first week of the season, an all-time high and up 380% compared to last year. And finally, the WNBA set an all-time high for League Pass subscriptions last month with a 355% increase versus last season. So in simple terms, business is booming. Hard to argue with that. As we said last week on In the Lab, this is a landmark season for the WNBA. Justin, your thoughts on that, and then I want to go into the recent, because yes, there's another Caitlin Clark controversy this week.
Yeah, lots of attention. I think the league has done a solid job with capitalizing on all the attention. I would give it probably a C plus, even though, like, you might be saying, like, why the ratings are up, everything's spectacular. But our previous conversation, I was complaining about not being able to see this game. So I'm on just my Roku the other day, and I find I can watch Ion on Roku channel for free. I can watch Ion on Tubi for free. I didn't know that. I just happened to stumble across it. So now, but probably the general public doesn't know that there's other ways of watching this content. So that's where I knock them in terms of making sure that a lot of these games are visible to people like myself who want to watch more games and necessarily don't want to buy League Pass for that. Even though it's a great bargain, I think it's like $35 for the entire season. That's awesome. But you don't want to spend that money. You just want to watch the games via your streaming providers. Tubi and Roku channel is a great mechanism of doing that. But nevertheless, it's cool to see. I think it speaks to just the rising momentum, and we'll get into this later. Of just this is not just a Caitlin Clark effect. This is not like no one was watching this league for the longest period of time. All of a sudden, she comes in and everybody's paying attention. I think the league has been a on a path of momentum, and she is the catalyst of sparking real interest in this league.
Yeah, I mean, in many cases, though, doubling and tripling and even
Sure.
beyond that on these metrics. I mean, that is pretty astounding. So I think Catalyst is well put. It's interesting because there there are sides of people that seem a little bit resentful for people just coming in this season and kind of bandwagoning, if you want to put it that way, or just basically they're newbies to the WNBA. It's been interesting to see because there has been, and you and I have spoken with many wonderful people who have covered the league for years, and I'm not calling any of them out certainly, but there is kind of, Justin, I think, like in hockey we've seen this before. There's like this sort of like purist faction that new people coming in getting excited about hockey, if that were to happen, there's a little bit of this like pushback, like, you don't know anything, don't talk about this sport, which contradicts directly the growth of a sport. And that's any sport. I don't care if it's women's basketball, hockey, what have you. So it's interesting to see there is this sort of pushback against some of that attention. And I understand anybody is bothered when somebody comes in and acts like an expert to something that they know very little about. But at the same time, it's going to be interesting to see how things develop, and if there is an acceptance to this broad new audience that's coming in. I think as long as there this interest that we have seen so far, and mind you, this is with Caitlin Clark with a very, very losing record. I mean, this team is not going to be around in the playoffs. As far as we're talking about, like postseason wise, this team is not going to be very interesting. But if this momentum continues, and if she is in fact a catalyst, like what we're seeing so far, and like you mentioned there, Justin, this league is headed towards big things, I think.
So you point to the media coverage, and I would say your hockey comparison, I would go more MMA because that's what
Hmm,
exactly what happened in that sport. So with
gotcha.
mixed martial arts, the sport was banned in America, except for a couple of states. So, and you notice because we would go to different bars and watch these fights, right? You see the momentum over time when we were in college, right? Fun times. So, and you noticed, if at least from myself, I was a pretty, I'm more of a, I would say, mid to casual fan of mixed martial arts now. But back in the day, I was a militant MMA fan and joining the community. A lot of the hardcore fan base was relegated to the internet, and they called newbies like kind of your top noobs, right? The Ultimate Fighter noobs got into it around the creation of the Ultimate Fighter reality TV show. And then
Right.
over time, I was young, and a lot of these shows, the established media, Jim Rome, Colin Cowherd, Partney Interruption, um, you know, other modern shows to sports reporters, I was expecting them to be enthusiastic about MMA, and I was very disheartened to hear them, not these respected reporters, not only not just dislike the sport. And I realized later, if you want to like or dislike something, that's your prerogative. Who cares? Like, no one's forcing you to watch something. But for them to spew misinformation and it to be flat out wrong, I was pretty disappointed. And I realized this is the name of the game. When I mean, sports is pretty much like high school. Like, you have the popular kids, which is your establishment sports, right? I would say your establishment leagues. So the NBA, I would say the NFL, and then kind of the second tier of that is kind of Major League Baseball and the NHL, right? And then you have, your other kind of mainstream sports within tennis. I would say golf, and I think the UFC has worked this way as a league into the kind of the mainstream consciousness, depending on if there's a big fight or not. I don't think there's that fear of when there's a Conor McGregor fight of like him dying in the octagon. I think we're past that. It's more will he show up to fight, and he's talking about his indiscretions outside of the cage, like any other boxing match. All that to say, with the WNBA, I understand where our colleagues and our former guests are coming from when you have not necessarily fans, but experts and reporters that's supposed to be so-called analysts of what's happening, spewing misinformation and misguiding the conversation in a negative manner, a la First Take and with Stephen A. Smith. I get
Hmm.
their frustration. I understand where they're coming from that, and I understand their hostility from them, feeling some kind of way about other people, spreading a lot of this misinformation and just, I think, steering the conversation into a wrong manner. Now, me saying that, however, look what happened to the UFC. There was plenty. It was a fiasco with this mainstream media. It was stupid. A lot of people just spewing a tons of facts. What happened? Eventually, over time, mixed martial arts, and particularly the UFC, proved that they are a mainstream sports property, and it became part of the discourse. And you saw there was first you had your rising fighters with you had George St. Pierre Anderson. You know this Anderson. I can
Right.
list all the names, and then what happened with Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor. Bam, right there, in a huge explosion in popularity. Where now it's part of the kind of mainstream sports discourse, depending on the fight compared to where it was 10 years ago. And I think with Caitlin Clark, what she represents, I think she reminds me of a lot of like kind of your George St. Pierre. If we're comparing it to MMA, your George St. Pierre, your Anderson Silva, where she is kind of like that first, I think from whatever reason, kind of the star that the mainstream has caught on to, and that honestly, the stars that are in college now, or even high school, that we haven't even talked about, but in particularly Juju Watkins, Paige Buckers, those will be kind of your next generation that's going to push this league into higher, ratings and higher attendance, and higher attention as well. But overall, to say this, it gets messy. We have a lot of people that just don't know what they're talking about, and this is kind of the way it is. And I get where their feelings are. I get why they're upset. I truly do, and I echo some of their sentiments. But does it matter? I mean, ultimately, the attention is going to be spread in terms of this league growing, and there's already buzz on rising players within college. So Kaylin Clark is not going to be the only player that I think the um, your casuals are going to be grabbed onto. I think we've seen it with just the ratings across college basketball. There are other exciting players that are going to prove to have a large following entering the WNBA. I know I talked a lot. I apologize, but
No,
um,
that's okay.
I think there's a lot of layers to that.
I've seen it expressed. Let me say this, just a couple thoughts.
Sure,
I don't mind calling by name. Colin Cowherd said, basically as kind of his take on not covering the WNBA all that much to this point was kind of, I wait until you are a made product before I talk about you on my show. And now the WNBA, with the current ratings and the boom they're having this season, I think is a good sign for them in many ways that now he's willing to talk about them. Um, because that's a huge radio show, whether you like Colin Cowherd or not. If you're talking about the casual sports fan
sure.
consumer, if you're being talked about on his show, it's a pretty good sign for your sport. I mean, unless it's just disastrous news, which it's not in terms of Caitlin Clark. I've heard the other many people saying as well, like, well, Caitlin Clark is getting all this coverage. There were many before her that deserve this same level of coverage. And while, again, trying to understand that frustration, I think the best move for people covering that, and this goes with frustration towards the newbies as well. I mean, keep in mind, this league is now booming, and you're looking towards elevating to like major sports status now in terms of the numbers, and being able to stand on your own without being subsidized by the NBA. I mean, all things that I think true basketball fans have wanted to see. So I guess, I don't know, people can feel however they want to be, but I would kind of caution living in the past and encourage, like, this is great. We're in this spot. Let's move forward and succeed.
Uh, I disagree with you. So, for a couple of things. First, Colin Cowherd. That's convenient for him to say when the WNBA is now a television partner. WNBA is not on Fox. What happens when the WNBA is on Fox? He's going to be ordered to talk about it. Look what happened with him in pro wrestling. He said a bunch of vile things about pro wrestling. I remember I was going to college and he said some horrible things. All of a sudden, years later, Fox is a television partner with the WWE. He's having wrestlers on there. He's talking about it. Do you think Calvin Cowherd cares about pro wrestling? No. He was they're a cross promotion with that. Fox doesn't have a vested interest in the WNBA. And like you were saying, and to agree with you somewhat, he's talking about because it's within the mainstream sports
Right.
consciousness. But
That's my point.
exactly, but that's not like for every topic. I mean, he's there also if there's an NFL talk that takes priority because his bosses are telling him to talk about it. So it's not like this is he's totally independent and he is picking and choosing what is galvanizing his what his listeners want to talk to you. I think second to your point about not repeating what's happening in the past and focusing on the future. My problem is not so much with the reporters, and my problem is not really with even First Take even talking about the WNBA. I don't think it's First Take's responsibility to be honest, as well as a lot of these different sports talk venues. My problem is with the actual television partner of ESPN and airing these highlights on SportsCenter and having different supplemental content of promoting the league. That is my issue. And over the years, it's been treated as an afterthought with your television partners. So, of course, like I said last week, your fans, sports talk, radio people, they're not going to care about this league because the television partner doesn't give a crap. Like, if you take a look, cornhole is on ESPN. And guess what we're watching during the pandemic? Cornhole. There's no other sports, right? Like, nothing else going on except cornhole. Now, there's tons of sports. Is ESPN talking about cornhole? Probably not. There's 10, 11, whatever million sports happening right now. And so I think with my issue with the league itself and these players not doing their just due, I think their anger should be directed at the television partners in the past and at the league for not promoting them the way they should be promoted and not so much sports talk figures. Like they're, and also let's be honest with First Take. I mean, they're a bottom of the barrel show. I mean, you take a look
Right.
at what they're talking about every day. They're talking if there's been huge other sports stories. They're talking about who's better, Jordan or LeBron, for the thousandth time. I
Right. It's
mean,
it's clickbait in
come on.
television
They're.
form.
I mean, it's kind of. I just think trying to beg for attention on First Take, I think, is a little much
Mm.
for my own personal taste. And I think what matters is the relationship between the WNBA and Amazon, the WNBA and Ion, and the WNBA within ESPN in terms of presenting actual supplemental content that people are going to watch and presenting stories of other players. That's what's going to get this league over. The same thing with the UFC when they started their television deal with ESPN. They weren't just talking about Conor McGregor 24/7. They're presenting other fighters, and they grew in popularity. I mean, I never forget going to a party of a friend, and they're talking about Khabib, and he's from Russia. His English is very limited. His style is grappling, but they're into him. I mean, they're really
Mhm.
into what he was doing. And that's a good example of having a television partner who's pushing the interests of the league. And that spreads in terms of sports talk and social media. But if you have a terrible partner, I mean, that's going to lead to just, you know, the league not being as popular. So that's where my issue comes with. It's not so much just, trying to get approval from Good Morning America or GMA or Stephen A. Smith or Colin Cowherd. It's just your TV partner actually giving a crap about your league.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, TV companies, network providers, all this. I mean, I think I certainly agree they've been sleeping on this and they've had this as an option for a long while, but they are, as any business is, they're risk averse in terms of the ratings. Like if they don't see something that they're convinced is going to get ratings like it probably should have. I mean, honestly, I remember watching Diana Taurasi in college, and I wasn't following women's basketball as closely as men's basketball. And I think at that time, you could argue men's college basketball was in a stronger position during that era compared to right now where, women's basketball is doing work with those ratings. I think they
Yeah, I agree.
needed to see that that flip in the ratings in order to be able to make a risk. And I think there's a case there that could be a mistake or maybe just mismanagement of developing the product itself. But I think you know, it's frustrating. I can understand to the hardcore fans who have been there for a long time supporting this, but there's kind of nothing that can be done about the past. They just have to understand those mistakes maybe were made and push forward. And the good news is there's good footing now and there's buy-in, it seems, across the board in perfect timing for this next TV deal that's going to come up.
Yeah, and league expansion too, and that will alleviate kind of a lot of the issues that the league has been experiencing over the years we've been talking about. So,
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully so. So let's move into the actual controversy here. I think that was some good discussion about media and about the catalyst that Caitlin Clark has been to this point in her young professional career. And let's talk about a little disappointment that she has had to face here. And I don't know in terms of what her expectation was in terms of making this team. But if you've been following the news on this, you know that Caitlin Clark did not make Team USA. She has had some professional accolades so far, being Rookie of the Month, the first month that she was eligible to be that. So it's not like she's been a scrub in the pros in spite of her team's win-loss record. She's done some things there. We've talked about, the turnovers and things like that and things she needs to improve on. I think everyone understands that she's a rookie and has the ball in her hands quite a bit at times, which usually leads to high turnovers in the NBA or WNBA. But Justin, can you tell us who made this Team USA roster and then your thoughts on if this is a snub or not?
yeah, so I won't read you the entire roster just to keep things moving. So I'll read you some highlights here.
Sure.
Brittany Griner, Jewel Loy, Kelsey Plum, Sabrina Ionescu, Chelsea Gray, some of the standouts, Asia Wilson as well. You kind of check out the full roster on ESPN just to keep things moving. That the squad has combined for 15 Olympic gold medals, 15 FIBA Women's World Championship titles, and 55 WNBA All-Star appearances. So looking at this with Caitlin Clark, so besides her marketability, I know everybody's pointing to why her should be on the team. No one's really pointing out, and this is why I thought she's going to make the team. She has international experience already. I mean, she competed in the FIBA Under-19 World Cup gold medal, and then she competed under FIBA America's Under-16 Championship, and no one's mentioned that. Everybody's mentioning that she didn't attend training camp, and she can't. Well, it sucks for her because she was, in the Final Four. She has international experience. So that's where I'm confused, is she already has – she's not only a great player. That's the thing, too, that's irritating me because people are just treating her as she's some kind of marketing ploy. She's also a great player.
Right.
And I'm sorry, looking at her body of work this season, she has lived up to the hype with me. And we'll talk about maybe another podcast. She has a horrible coach. I'll just say it. I'm sorry. The coaching has just been terrible, I believe, this season. And the team, if you watch the games I've watched, their roster is not terrible. And she is trying to get her teammates involved. It's just bad coaching. And I think, honestly, her coach will be gone by the end of this season. And that might be harsh to say, but her coach is out of there. You can't have, when you have 2 number 1 picks, Aaliyah Boston made a WNBA All-Star team. She's having a worse season this year. I mean, what would we be saying if this was the Lakers and, any other NBA team? What would happen to the coach? You have 2 number 1 picks, the All-Star. I mean, you have a number 1 pick that made the All-Star team, previously this year to have a terrible year. Wouldn't you think that coach would be fired immediately with all the hype of having 2 number 1 picks if they're that bad? I mean, or they'd be at least on a super hot seat.
It's tough. I mean, the league is deep and they're a young team, but you've got some points there.
It's not the record. It's because they've played the New York Liberty, Connecticut Sun. I mean, they played some just really awesome teams. I'm not talking about the record. It's just them getting destroyed by halftime. And I understand we talked about there's some blame to go for the WNBA in terms of their schedule. I think they're culpable. But if you take a look at this team, they should not be this bad. Just with all the talent, they're not a horrible roster. Like this is because everybody's talking about, well, including myself, I was wrong on that and pointing to how bad the roster was. It's not true. They got a lot of great players on it. It should not be this bad. And I think tying this to the Team USA discussion, I think it's easy to say, well, she has a lot of high turnover. She's inexperienced, all this. When I think she's been killing it this season. I mean, she got
Mm.
the whole debacle the last game. They were getting killed by the Connecticut Sun, and a lot of the starters got benched. And it's just, I mean, what are we doing? And I think overall, answering along with it to answer your question, I feel both ways about it.
Mm.
I think my issue with her being left off this team is Chelsea Gray's injury.
Mm.
That's where I have some questions about this because she has not played this season for the Aces. We don't know if she's going to return to the Aces by the time we get to the Olympic break. I mean, by the time even the All Star break, because the All Star game is Team USA versus the WNBA. So that's
Mhm.
another interesting kind of storyline to this. But but at the same time, you take a look at somebody like Enrique Agumbawale, who plays for the Dallas Wings. She's the second leading scorer. So before Caitlin Clark, shouldn't she be on the team? She at least she's the second leading scorer. So that's where if I'm picking Enrique and Caitlin, I'm picking Enrique over Caitlin Clark as a
Mm.
snub. However, I don't think it's insane. I don't think it's if she was on this team, I wouldn't, oh, especially over Chelsea Gray, I wouldn't call it a massive injustice either. So I kind of see both sides of this. I'm not outraged she didn't make the team, but we can kind of point to the marketing side. I think we're talking purely basketball. I just don't like it to where she has it, no one's really highlighting her international experience, and that's a little bit frustrating.
So let me ask you this way.
Sure.
We'll try to
Yeah.
pin down one direction or another.
Sure. Fair.
And of course, we always keep nuance on this show, so I understand
Fair.
where you're coming from.
Yeah.
If you're on that selection committee,
Yes.
if you're on there, are you arguing to put Caitlin Clark among the 12 or not among the 12?
I would say none among the 12, and adding Enrique onto the team. So no,
Got
from a
you.
pure
Okay.
basketball. And it's to read a quote from the selection chair, Jen Rossetti. I don't know if you have the same quote as I do. The
I
quote,
do, I think.
here is the basketball criteria that we were given and how we do evaluate our players is on that. And then you base our decision on criteria. There are other players that were harder to cut because they checked a lot more boxes. Sometimes it comes down to position, style of play for Coach Cheryl Reeve, and then sometimes there's a vote. Another quote here: age has never been brought up in our discussions. There is inclusion of a lot of young players in the pool. When we focus on the selection criteria, the players that fit, that are the most, just happen to be above 25. That was not intentional. So who knows? And there's been other snubs in the past of other great WNBA players have not made this team. So this is not unprecedented either. So, and from a basketball standpoint, I'm not outraged that Kaylin didn't make it. I just overall don't like that. Well, she didn't attend the training camp. There's no way for put her on this team. I think
Right.
that's pretty unfair to her, in my opinion.
Yeah, so my take on this is if I'm in that selection committee, I am fighting tooth and nail to get her on this team,
I can see that.
regardless of what anyone else is saying. And it's not even I think it's fair to make the case that it's too early to tell if she deserves it based on playing merit. But when you have a special case situation and that catalyst that you mentioned earlier, and the data is there, I don't think you leave her off that roster, even if she's getting 3 minutes a game. And I know that that maybe is not fair to the one person that's left off that team in her place, but you have such an opportunity to get more and more viewers. And I do think there is a little bit more momentum from a casual viewer potentially tuning in because it's Olympics. But why would you limit the chances of that by keeping Caitlin Clark off the roster? I don't think there is any danger, even if you take Diana Taurasi, who I know is 41 and may not be starting on this team. I don't know. Maybe out of honor and respect, maybe she will be starting on this team. But I think you could take Asia Wilson off this team, and she's amazing. She's probably the MVP right now in the WNBA. You could take any one of these players off this team, and they are still winning gold on the world stage because for women's basketball, as far as USA is concerned, we are well ahead of other countries at this point in our stage. Maybe it changes like the men's game has within the coming decades, but we're not at that point yet. So I think you do anything and everything to get Caitlin Clark on this team. Again, like I said, even if she's getting 3 to 5 minutes a game, it's going to be good experience for her to see how this all works. So you're securing the future of this team's success, but then also on, in some ways, a scale that's just as big as the sport itself. You're growing the sport. That would be my take. I think we look back on this in 4 years, and ultimately, it's not this like breaking type of moment for women's basketball. But that's what I would be fighting for.
So I'm going to give you some stats. This is from Richard
Sure.
Deitch. Shout out to him, former guest of the show, of The
Yeah.
Athletic. So this is the average viewership numbers of the last 4 women's basketball gold medal games. 2021 Tokyo, 7.9 million viewers, which includes out-of-home measurement. 2000, and now it's also COVID year too, where things was just weird in terms of this viewership. 2016, probably more traditional, no kind of controversy in terms of the actual Olympics taking place. In Rio, 8.1 million viewers. London, 10.2 million viewers. Beijing, 5.9 million viewers. So I think this would be a much super bigger deal if this was the next Olympics, which is going to be in America. I think that would be just just the attention, and I think you have to wonder too, like how much do people really care about the Olympics? I mean, and from a promotional tool, like I don't know. I just think the cachet of the Olympic Games, I think, has really decreased as I think I have gotten older as an adult compared to when I was a kid. So I get what you're saying, Matt. I think it was very interesting because Van Lathan and Rachel Lindsay of the Higher Learning podcast were having a similar discussion about this. They're talking about Bronny James, and how Van Lathan basically said that he's a McDonald's All American just because of LeBron and getting the people to watch the game. And it makes me wonder, Bronny being in the NBA, he'd be a rating straw just because of his father, but ultimately he's not ready for the pros, and you're harming his career by him being drafted. And I'm just wondering here with Caitlin Clark, it's different because I think her basketball play, along with her marketing, merits her a spot on this team. I get what you're saying because I think if she was just super popular, but she was a pretty mediocre player, I think I'd be directly opposed to doing that. But I think her basketball body of work combined with her marketability and the numbers you have mentioned, I understand where you're coming from. And honestly, I don't think it's a slam dunk case in terms of just taking her off, leaving her off this team. I think
Sure.
that's a tough decision. I
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, you're good.
To your point about the Olympics, I totally agree with you. There's diminished interest in the Olympics, but what we have demonstrated by the numbers that you just mentioned
Sure.
is people are interested in Caitlin Clark
That's true.
and what she does. So I understand, like, there have been millions of viewers for the games, even in weird years. I still think it could be more. I still think even
I feel you.
what we have, there's a new audience here that can be brought in on this. And I think personally it's a missed opportunity. I know a lot of people feel another way about it and don't really care that Caitlin Clark was left off. That's fine. I just think if people are really gung-ho about we're trying to grow the sport, I'm sorry, she should have been on this roster. That's your maximum capacity, maximum effort towards growing the sport itself.
What are the consequences of leaving her off the team? And this is a genuine question. So we get, and I think to your point, if they lose, I mean, they will get annihilated by everyone, especially leaving Caitlin Clark off this team. So I'm just wondering, playing out both scenarios, if this team loses, if they don't win the gold medal, number one, and even if they do, Caitlin Clark, in both scenarios, Caitlin Clark's not on this team. What are do you foresee kind of the negative impact? Because if the impact is minimal and Caitlin Clark just has a kick-ass year next year and the ratings go up, what was really the significance of leaving her off the team? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean it's hypothetical. So it could have been accelerated growth by having her on this team.
Sure.
And for the record, I don't think she should start on this team. I think she should be there to play 5 to 10 minutes, something like that. She should not be the headliner in terms of playing time on this team. I think the most damaging outcome would be this team loses and they were going like maybe the ultimate of what I would like if a TV exec was in charge of this team and Caitlin Clark is playing every minute of this game or else. Like that's the worst scenario is Caitlin Clark really stumbles, the team loses, and it's clearly because of mistakes that she made or something like that. That's too much in one direction. And that's not what I'm for, but I am for her being on this team. Ultimately, like I said, I think in 4 years in the next Olympics, I don't think we're going to look at this like, man, the WNBA really could have been something, but then they flamed out when Caitlin Clark wasn't selected. I don't think we're going there with that by any means. I think there's going to be continued growth. To me, I just see it as a slight stunting of the potential growth.
Can I ask you another question,
Of
if you don't
course.
mind? It's kind of moving away from this Team USA, but a lot of comments within our last video going back and forth, and it's gone past basketball into more political, and it's kind of reflected the discourse that we've seen on social media, and then just on television everywhere. You can't get away from it, and I don't know, compared to the NBA, in which unless somebody, Kyrie's making comments about vaccinations or, there's something going on with LeBron in China, the actual basketball itself doesn't really get political, right? Unless you're dealing with like political issues, like now in terms of like the actual play on the court, you don't actually see politics being a. Does that make sense? Like, and I think with Caitlin Clark, I think we're seeing a lot of just different. The conversation's moving away from actual basketball. And I think that's been frustrating for me and taken away for what actually she's having a pretty awesome season. And I think this rookie class has been awesome to watch. I think Kate Martin, her teammate, that has been a phenomenal story. She wasn't even expected to be drafted into the league. And, now all of a sudden she's had this relationship with Asia Wilson. She's been awesome for the Aces. I know they've had not a great start to their season, but there's a lot of great storylines within the W itself. And I just think this discussion about Caitlin Clark is just such a crisis every single game. And it's just exhausting. And it's not her fault. And I don't know. I don't know how you feel about the discussion so far, because to me, just people hijacking it, the people that don't even give a crap about women's sports on both sides, either on both, either way, I just think it's been gross so far. I've hated it, to be honest.
Well, I think this is one of those things, Justin, where politics, and you and I have talked about this off camera too.
Sure.
Politics is such a monolith in society. It is really, I would argue, disgustingly venerated in many cases. People get very passionate about politics, things like that. These leagues, the W as well as the NBA, have had very politically involved type of discussions and things that they've done. And most people supporting the league, I think, are supportive of those initiatives, but I can't really say the leagues have been apolitical. And by the way, they're not the only leagues that have been political. I think there are things that the NFL has done that are political. You can look at any sports league, any professional sports league, I think, that have had certain initiatives and messaging and campaigns and things along those lines. I think with the discourse that we're seeing about Caitlin Clark, this is, again, potentially a different fan base coming in with different views and sensibilities. And this is one of those questions where, again, is the WNBA willing to open its arms at large, and maybe the media covering it as well, to let this sport grow to this level where you have people from all political aisles? Because ideally, if you're a business, you're a sport, you want everyone included and interested in this. You want those ratings up.
Yeah.
You want people involved in these conversations, and that's going to lead to discourse that people people disagree with. I mean, just more discourse in general.
But understood. But when you have your newer fans go after these players not for basketball reasons, just because of their sexuality or their race. That's not political. That's discrimination. There's a huge difference. So that's where I understand where it's just when we were getting to Chicago Sky, when you have a man threatening them, like I don't want the league open to them. Like get the crap out. Like they're being threatened. Like what are we doing? So that's where yeah, there should be a hard line drawn there. Now, if these are new fans, if you're criticizing, yeah, and there's also too, like with Kennedy Carter, right? Like absolutely, she should be criticized in terms of like a cheap shot. Like, why are you doing that? But should she be going to jail? Like, no. Like, what? It look, Asia Wilson got decapitated. It, she was bleeding. Like, no one talked about that. That was a few games ago. She's gotten beat up in the lane. No one's even talking about that. She's, MVP count. Want to probably be a Hall of Famer by the time her career is over. I'm guaranteed. They have a statue of her already in South Carolina. She's getting beat up. No one's talking about that. I mean, I'm just saying. So I think and I understand, and I think this is where it gets nuanced, right? I understand what you're saying in terms of media coverage, like with Angel Reese and Chicago Sky, should be ducking post game press conferences. Show up. If you win or lose, show up. You're obligated. Don't be doing that. I understand what you're saying. But at the same time, when you're having the first press conference with Caitlin Clark, you have the guy being misogynist to her with the whole, doing the whole love symbol and all that fiasco with that reporter. Like, I don't want the league open arms to that. Like, so I think there is a fine line. And I think criticism of their play, that is different compared to, hey, we don't like their sexuality, we don't like the way they look. We're going to criticize them for all these other things that the NBA, I think there was makes, I think that sucked too with racism as well in terms of, hey, these guys are dressing too much like hip hop culture. You're scaring away some of the other fans because you're not in a suit and tie. So, I think that is where I draw the line at. But in terms of media availability, just ducking different press conferences, I think they should be obligated to meet those. And what we discussed in our last podcast, we had our interview with that Washington Post reporter. Yeah, I don't like them not talking to the media. Don't like that at all. However, when you're dealing with different interactions with new media and they're going to ask questions that could be deemed as discriminatory or hateful, I don't want them near them. Yeah, gladly so. I mean, I'll stand. But so I think there's a fine line there. Absolutely.
Yeah, what I'll say is, in society, public figures are targets, and people don't always treat public figures as human beings. That's
True.
that's part of the nature, the unfortunate nature of being a public figure. And the WNBA now, more than ever, based on what we've seen by the data, has a bigger spotlight on it. And these many in the media, as well as us, have talked about wanting these players to be bigger public figures. I'm not saying it's right. This is part of what happens in society when you have a bigger spotlight on you. It's an unfortunate side effect, especially any type of hateful comments or dehumanizing things like that. I mean, obviously, we're not for that, but it can be a very ugly thing to step into the public arena.
No, it's true. And I think we have to recognize just compared to the MMA comparison I was making earlier, before Ronda Rousey got into the UFC, predominant all male, right? So what the WNBA has been dealing, I mean, the criticism of the league has been sexist, in my opinion. Just in terms of, well, if they dunked, I would watch. Are we talking about dunks on like a nightly basis in the NBA? No. Like right now, what's popping in the NBA the last, I would say, decade or so has been the 3-point shot. I mean, that's getting a lot more attention. And so I think what the WNBA, what Angel Reese has gone through compared to a male counterpart is different. And I think that should be recognized in terms of what they have gone through as a criticism of their league. And I would kind of love to talk to you because I've heard now, the product has been better in the WNBA compared to years past. I would like to see some actual evidence of that because there's been some great players in the past. Like that's what's just kind of baffling me about this discussion. I know we spent almost an hour on this, but I just feel to me, what's been hard to stomach is I believe Caitlin Clark. I said this before. I think she's going to be a future Hall of Famer. This is not me knocking her. I believe in her game. She can ball. And I think she has been awesome this year, despite the hurdles she's had experience. However, they've all subconsciously, I think a lot of new fans have just treated her like she's the only best basketball player within the WNBA, and that's ridiculous. Like that's been irritating to me. Like if you just watch it, because as I mentioned the last show, I'll keep repeating it. All Star Weekend, it was Sabrina Ionescu and Steph Curry, and this year there's been very little attention on kind of the other players, let alone her, who had that big moment with Steph Curry. So I don't know. That's just been bothering me through this entire discourse. I understand criticism, no problem with that. I think they should be able to meet their media obligations, but also too, I just don't like the ugly. I just don't like this being twisted to some kind of culture war. It sucks. I think before, at least within the regular basketball discourse, it's like, hey, LeBron's a flopper. Like, don't flop. Don't be a whiner, whining to the refs. Like, it's within the context of basketball. Or, hey, LeBron, you joined the big three. Like, just your basic conversations. And I feel like when we're talking about the WNBA, we're not having those conversations yet. And I think that is disappointing. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, point well taken. It's a tough thing. I think it's going to take time.
It
It's
is.
going to take
You're right.
exposure.
It is. Yeah.
There are, it to try to shine some light on it. I mean, there are people who have tuned in to Caitlin Clark that I have seen saying, like, now I know who Asia Wilson is. Now I know about the Aces and what they've done the last 2 years. And now I know about Becky Hammon. I know about all these different players across the league. So it's going to take some time for that to grow. You have
Absolutely.
like a rare thing, I think, and again, I'm kind of spinning this optimistically, call me the eternal optimist or whatever, but you have a lot of people, and it's rare to see this like first time experiencing a product like this in an entire sports league. And we're seeing, and that it isn't all nice and sunshine and flowers,
You're right.
unfortunately.
You're right. No, that's what happened with the MMA and the UFC. It was a disaster, but it took education and patience. And I think to go off your point, Matt, I would encourage a lot of the hardcore media that have been covering this league for a long time and the fan base. Unless there are comments about discrimination, hate, of course, be super hostile to that. Of course, I don't want them near this game. But if there are fans that might be, hey, Caitlin Clark, she's great. The rest of the league sucks. Like, I think, including myself, let's use education, some calm, just exposing other players that are great in this league, and not be so hostile on social media. In terms of the actual basketball, I think you're right. There's some patience would be well needed in this manner. I think that would help in terms of this discourse. But again, when it deals with hate, anything that's outside of kind of the basketball world, I'm not for that. And I think that should be strictly erased from the discourse. But like you're saying, Matt, you're right. I think it's about patience, and I think for a lot of the I think you bring up a good point. It's true. Hey, I think you're right on the money with a lot of the basketball media being hostile, and I think I get those feelings. I feel you. I understand. At the same time, I think it's also about people that they're into Caitlin Clark. I think they're good intention, and I think when they're met with some hostile comments, that could prove to be detrimental, and that could turn off a lot of fans too, and that's gonna suck. And so I'm with you, man. I think patience, some understanding, would be probably the best course of action here.
It's a balancing act,
Yeah.
no doubt. Justin, great discussion. I mean, spending 50 minutes here on women's basketball and the growth that we've had in all these numbers. You guys, of course, as always, we value your thoughts and opinions. Let us know in the comments, should Caitlin Clark have been on Team USA, whether you think from a merit perspective or a growth perspective or one way or another. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about our talk with I guess, kind of the growing pains of the league as it goes through this landmark season and what we just discussed with some of those issues. Be sure to let us know in the comments. Justin, anything else before we sign out here?
Just check out our archive content again. We at the interview an actor, J. Alphonse Nicholson, who plays Chris Paul on Clipped. Check
Shout out
that
to
out.
him.
We interviewed Dante Hammer Harrison of the Harlem Globetrotters. Lots of authors. Kurt Goldberry's been on the podcast. Michael Eaves. A lot of great content. Again, NBA season's fast moving, but a lot of evergreen content kind of to keep you going as well, just through the summer months.
Absolutely. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. See you again soon. Peace out.
See you later.